Last week was the release of patch 7.1 for Dawntrail, promising a bunch of new content and even more to come. Among them, the ending of the questlines for the role quests and deliveries, which I'm very interested in, along with our good buddy Hildebrand and his latest zany deductive adventures. But a new patch also means a new chunk of MSQ to continue the expansion's main narrative. On that note, to recap, by the end of Dawntrail's launch story, we had shut down living memory, vanquished the Eternal Queen, Sphene, and put Baby Yoda, Gulool, on the throne to take over in the future when he's a little bit taller. Peace returns to Tuliyollal, and the Alexandrians are left with grief for perhaps the first time, but somewhat content that their way of life of using souls as a commodity was still intact, as messed up as it may be. But we can see, even from the intro cutscene to the Arcadion, that the Alexandrians are going to struggle with a feeling of loss. And that's where we pick up. The Alexandrians are preparing for Sphene's funeral, and the Dawn Servants get the invitation, and it's decided that Gulool will be attending with the Warrior of Light, the twins, and the Baldeskians, G'raha and Kryl. We meet Baby Yoda, aka Gulool, and attend the funeral. In the middle of it, we see a mother and child discussing the loss of Sphene, and why is it that they have to remember her and deal with the sadness. Gulool attempts to give them perspective or maybe even make them feel better by sharing the Yakuy belief of keeping people alive by remembering them. But that just doesn't work with the Alexandrians, who'd rather forget the pain, run away from it, rather than face sadness head-on. So her words fail to reach the pair. Seeing this, Baby Yoda wonders if remembering those who passed is really a good thing. After all, when he remembers his dad and Sphene, is sad. But it's not the case with his mother because he never met her. Which is a valid point. Grief is personal. It requires a connection. And of course, this opens the conversation about Gulool Mama, who is someone I'd been dying to know about. I wanted to see who had enough issues, and or booze, to look at Zoraal and say, you got a lot of daddy issues and that's kinda hot. Well, truth wasn't that far off, but we'll get to that. We ask around and learn that before the dome, before the dimensional fusion, that Zoraal and the Landsguard came around to take care of a Tural withdrawal, and that among them was a Mamulja lady, and that could be Gulool's mom. This ties back to the start of the Rite of Succession, where it's mentioned that Bakul Jaja was the winner of some form of tournament, and, always looking to have a dig at his competitors, Bakul pokes fun at Zoraal for not having been there at the competition, with Koana telling him that his brother was awake taking care of a Tural withdrawal. But it's not just that they went there to handle the monster, but also that once Zoraal was king, he diverted many researchers to that same area, Uweyawata, north of Everkeep across the water. It's something of a surprise given that everyone thought that the only facility in King Zoraal's personal purview was the Vanguard, but apparently this place was building some sort of weapon. That of course leads us to the new dungeon. But, as it's usually the case in Final Fantasy XIV, the dungeon itself holds documents that we can read for a bit of lore. Not only that, but it was an opportunity to run it with the NPCs. For me, it was basically benching Gulool and just go at it with the silence. I don't have a problem with Gulool as others do, but even I wanted a little part of the adventure to just be with my good buddies. Turns out, this facility was Zoraal's personal Umbrella Corporation laboratory. Just instead of viruses, they were going to dangerous places with the research on souls. In fact, this facility seems to be the place where they unlocked the ability to use beast souls, which is already commonplace by the time we enter Alexandria in the main story, with hunters and Zoraal's royal guard using them. A big clue to this is that one of the notes you find says that beast souls had been proposed in the past but were never pursued due to ethical concerns, but that Zoraal gave the go-ahead anyway. Not only that, it stated that abusing the soul of a beast can lead to physical transformation, which we also see in the final boss in Vanguard. So whatever this place was attempting, they succeeded on that front, and at least for Zoraal and his guards, transformation was an acceptable risk. but it also says that people are a fragile vessel for a beast's soul. So it could very well be that unless it was a very powerful beast, then Zoraal would not have transformed. I mean, look at the trial for Zoraal. It takes an obscene number of souls from Everkeep to cause him to transform into the creature we end up fighting. But this crew didn't just stop at researching how to properly use beast souls. Knowing that the vessel is the problem, someone theorized that they could purge the memories of a beast and infuse that creature with the soul of a person with its memories intact, thus gaining a vessel of tremendous power that they could still control. And how did they reward this bit of thinking? By making the person who thought it the first test subject. So it's clear that ethical boundaries were not even remotely a concern for this crowd, and results were what mattered, to impress King Zoraal and advance tech as much as possible. I do theorize that members of the Preservation, that organization that first devised the infusion of souls, was involved here. Its researchers were part of the crew and very much on board with the plan, not for Zoraal's sake, but to advance the technology and mastery over souls. In fact, I believe the Preservation is behind some of the key events in this patch, at least as far as it concerns the Alexandrians. But the head researcher, Overseer Kaniloka, was very much a Zoraal loyalist. You fight him as the second battle in the dungeon, and all his lines are about extracting our souls and using them for Zoraal's purposes and his glory. And they must have advanced their mastery over souls as a power. Most of his abilities, especially the ones that deploy big damaging puddles, have hands and arms stretching out of them, likely the many souls used to power the effects. He could also very well be dead, and the use of souls is more a metaphysical thing, even though he's covered head to toe in tech, in that he may be an undead. I say this because the facility is empty, with just monsters going around, which could indicate that they used every single member of the staff to experiment, and the monsters we fight on the way are all the test subjects. His final remark was one of regret, stating he wished they could have tamed the beast, but the seal was now broken. And that's the final boss, the Tural Vidral that Zoraal came to take care of, but instead of killing it, he only sealed it, and using its power as very much the ultimate goal of the research crew. This boss fight is amazing, and though in general the dungeon is great and another notch on the belt of Dawntrail's outstanding battle content, the Tural Vidral bunny takes the cake. Such a great fight, with limited space to move as the major restriction while still avoiding dangers. I really enjoyed it. At the conclusion of the dungeon, we see that we've not killed the beast. The big scary bunny is still alive, only subdued, which could explain why Zoraal just sealed it. Maybe he couldn't take it out, much like Gulool Papa and his crew couldn't kill Valigarmanda and had to seal it. This big rabbit also made me wonder how much the tone of Endwalker would have shifted if the Loporrits had been abominable creatures like this instead of the cute little bunnies that we got. Just imagine that scene where they're first introduced and form up, and replace them all with these monstrosities. It wouldn't have been shock on Thancred's face, but sheer horror. But enough of that horrific scenario and back to the story. There's a nice echo vision showing Overseer Kaniloka explain the plan of transferring souls onto beasts, and that the goal will be to eventually do the same with a Tural Vidral, and Zoraal is very much on board. And then we meet her, Tishalja, a follower of Zoraal who receives the instruction to assist Kaniloka but also keep tabs on him. And here she makes a request for her service, something she could never have in the outside world. And you can probably guess what that is. Zoraal agrees, but very much makes it clear he doesn't care. His focus is solely on, as he stated a few times in the MSQ, to prove the miracle. I surmised during the main story that whatever hang-ups Zoraal had, the 30 years in the dome meant he stewed in them thoroughly, becoming his main drive, his obsession. We head back into the main facility, with the aim of reaching what Kaneloka refers to as the observatory. But along the way, there's a bit of exploration and investigation, and there's a document that very much shows the horror and the folly of the whole infused beasts with people's souls. The document is from the point of view of someone who went through the transfer, and while they seem fine at the start, their cognitive ability deteriorates over time until they can only think about base needs, in this case, eating. Which once again leads me to my theory that the monsters we fight in the dungeon were the old test subjects, likely plenty of the research crew, and perhaps most horrifically of all, the villagers of the original Uweyawata village, who were the ones that called for help against the Turalvidral. There isn't a village in sight in this adventure, and while that's not conclusive on its own, it's a possibility that they were used as a research resource. Eventually, the party reaches the observatory and finds a bunch of data, of which they take Tishalja's logs back to Solution 9 so Shay can decode them. Then we have a little detour from this plot, as we're told there are plenty of people wanting to go back to Tuliyollal and connect with the folks there, but a lot of them are too old to make the journey. Gulool mentions that Koana is working on getting the railroad back on track, no pun intended. So that's where our journey will take us, back to the train gang to see what can be done. Apparently the new locomotive is almost finished, but they still have one major issue, and it's one I am so happy to see explored, especially with Koana there, as it's something that's only mentioned in the main story. How to handle the situation of the train being a nuisance to the Ronique and their followers, the Hhetsarro, aka Turali catfolk. Koana already has a plan to make the train run much more quietly, but presents a different problem: how to keep the creatures, any of them, away from the tracks. So we visit Mewa Hetson to chat with our favorite catboy druids, and I've been waiting for this encounter, because we all know that Koana has some issues with this culture, given that he was left behind as a baby, and if it hadn't been for a Pelu Pelu merchant that came around and took him, he probably would have been monster food. The folks here at Mewa Hetson are open for the dialogue, mentioning they might need to move soon, given that Ronique have been acting weird, moving away from their usual grazing grounds, and if they continue to do so, they'll have to follow. Koana comments on this with a bit of disdain, and shares his story with these folk, and they're shocked, given that they've never heard of a Ronique taking such an arduous path that would make parents abandon their child, and perhaps some extenuating circumstances forced that decision, but Koana dismisses it, saying he's not interested in learning more of their ways, just to give a better excuse for their action. But with some nudging, Koana relents, keeps an open mind, and chooses to learn more about the culture, to better understand the situation and how to best resolve it. This is Koana after all. He's the thinker of the two Dawn Servants, so he's gonna put his mind to finding a solution, but he needs all the data. And in this case, getting the data means getting his hands dirty and working as the Hhetsarro would, taking care of the Ronique and other such labors. And of course, we had to do the same. And the experience does bring some clarity to Koana. He sees and understands how strong a bond there is between the Ronique and the Hhetsarro, how they care for the animals but also use everything from them in their living, an example being their homes, which are made from Ronique hide. Essentially to the Hhetsarro, the Ronique are like family, part of the community, each group providing for the other. There's a symbiotic relationship there. With this knowledge, Koana considers the possibility that being left behind was not the selfish choice he once thought. Moreover, he now discards any plan that would involve changing the migration patterns of these creatures. And regarding this, Gulool had gone to look at the grazing grounds they seemingly abandoned, and found the place just fine, only too quiet, as if every animal had fled, and that only happens when animals can sense danger. Long story short, it's a giant crystal-covered monstrosity with a name so complicated, I'm not even gonna try to pronounce it. But it's basically a creature straight out of Monster Hunter, a T-Rex looking thing, and as we explore the situation, which culminates in an awesome solo trial where we fight him with Koana and Gulool, we learn that 20 years ago, there was a Hhetsarro tribe that was very much wiped out by one of these monsters, and that two of the Hhetsarro sacrificed themselves to fight the creature and give an opening for everyone else to run, shouting for someone to take care of their child. So with that, Koana discovers that his parents didn't leave him behind as he thought, but instead fought to their demise to ensure he and others would survive. A discovery that very likely would do a great deal in terms of healing that trauma. He said it in the past, when Gulool Mama arrived at the palace, and he knew that she had also been left behind, which we know is not true but was true for them at the time. He vowed to make sure she felt like she belonged, that she wasn't alone, so she would not experience the loneliness he felt. And that kind of feeling doesn't go away. It's a bitterness that sticks with you, and we can see it at the start when he's still bitter about the Hhetsarro. So it's nice to see that this discovery about his parents could possibly help him in ridding himself of that sense of abandonment. With the defeat of the giant monstrosity comes a new idea, to make something like a whistle, but instead of a sound, it creates a pulse of an ether signature similar to that of the creature, to alert the animals of the train's arrival, but without making them panic. It's a brilliant solution, and with it ready, the train is back to full service. Returning to Solution 9, it's time to hear Tishalja's logs. But first, we get a visit from Y'shtola to get Shade to come with her to Living Memory to continue her investigation into dimensional fusion and the travel across reflections. And she warns us that after Living Memory, she's coming for us to get that key. So I foresee more Y'shtola shenanigans in the future, and it's something I called out in my other video about the MSQ, that with all the new info on crossing to alternate worlds, Y'shtola was gonna be on top of that. And I want to know what she ends up finding out. Hell, maybe her discoveries are what leads us to that new group content for the Crafters and Gatherers, which apparently is related to helping other worlds. As for Tishalja, it's not good news for Baby Yoda. First, his conception is more of a transaction than anything else, and two, his mom is a creepy, deluded fan. She was smitten with Zoraal and very much just wanted to have a kid with him, and somehow expected that having the child would make him look at her, raise the kid with her, and that he'd abandon his goals. She was under the delusion that they would be a family. So she really wasn't in love with him, but with the idea of him that only existed in her mind. It's messed up. So of course, when Zoraal sees the kid, he's not exactly beaming with joy. Instead, he very much has an anxiety attack. He can't contemplate being a father, raising a child. When he dies, he tells Gulool that he couldn't be there because he was a lost man. And this is a demonstration of that. His hang-ups with his father, that feeling of being abandoned by him, which he mentions near his passing as, "He left me nothing, not a legacy, anything," plus the enormous weight of expectation that very much shaped him and again became his obsession, proving the miracle. Zoraal is very much broken, and so the notion of having his own family is probably horrifying to him. The scene is very short, so it doesn't really dive as deeply into his psyche as I would like it to, but I can only imagine, based on those lines prior to his demise, that he felt that he would do the same to his kid as was done to him in his own mind by Gulool Mama. There are people out there whose trauma, sometimes from abuse, makes them reluctant to have their own children, believing that they would inflict the same upon them. I think that's what's going on with Zoraal in this case. This scene also explains why Zoraal's reaction to Baby Yoda was so visceral when they meet for the first time in the MSQ. He had rejected the child, and now here he was, and the boy's been given his granddad's name, Gulool. If you see it carefully, it's hearing the name that sets him off in that scene. It creates a link to his dad again, which is very much the source of all of his issues. In the end, it's not a good experience for Gulool. He learned of his mother, heard her voice, and at least knows she loved him, but also she had some loose screws. Not only that, but we hear her last message to him, leaving him in a safe place while she went to deal with Kaniloka, as their experiments were not going well. And after that, apparently, something happened in the facility and she could not return for him, very much implying she's gone. Gulool, very mature for his age, is content with having found out the truth and appreciates the work everyone did, but is sad that his parents were very sad people, and that maybe if they had been together, they could have been happier. Unlikely, even though that was very much T'Shalja's dream. With that resolved, even if the end is bittersweet, there's still a loose thread for this patch, and it's the train thing. We're told the opinions from people have suddenly shifted, but now most are against going away from Alexandria, which is strange. So we head to investigate and find another Sphene marching into a crowd, and no one seems to remember that she died or that they had a funeral for her. Now, at the beginning of the patch, during that funeral, there were new funerary versions of the regulators on sale, with a brand new black coat of paint. But it turns out there's more to them than that. Before the new Sphene makes her entrance, the Alexandrians are discussing that people have died in the outskirts, that someone was struck by lightning and dropped dead. Of course, now that they remember everyone who's passed, they have to contemplate their own mortality, and they do not cope. And so the new Sphene strides in and tells them there's a plan in place to turn them all into endless, to have a body that will not age or die or decay, but that it will take time. The black regulators, aka neo-regulators, are in short supply, but that eventually they'll make enough for everyone. Of course, Gulool is enraged seeing this and demands to know who this imposter is, but she states calmly that she is Queen Sphene. But as the Warrior of Light and Lamati leave the area, we can see the Queen have a rather sinister smile on her face. It's preservation, I tell you. We broke living memory. We broke the previous Queen, so they're here for payback or to put things back on track from their point of view. But we need to add one final complication, and it's someone that sounds very much like Sphene, stumbling around living memory as if in a daze. We see it in first person, and the last image is Y'shtola and Shay running towards this individual. So I'm left wondering, is that the Sphene we met before, somehow respawned on living memory, as a consequence of whatever was done to create the new one in Alexandria right now? Is it the living Sphene somehow restored to life? Or are there now multiple new Sphenes, and these two are but the start and we'll see more of them? Maybe acting with limited capabilities, not full copies, but just enough to get the specific job done. Fragments, basically. Hell, they could be skins over other people, like a disguise, like a Fortnite skin. I have many theories, many questions, and I can only thank you for listening to me rant about most of them. If it's not already clear, I loved this patch. It gave me so much valuable information, as well as create some interesting mysteries. Still wondering what Sphene's crown is about? Maybe that's what holds the real Sphene's soul? Who knows, but I'm happy to find out. And there's something else that made this patch awesome, and it's the Alliance Raid. And not just because it's incredibly fun, but also because Jafarja is back, and he's the bad guy. I've been hoping and waiting for that character to return. But that's it for 7.1. I'll be back with more when the Roll and Delivery extra quests release, and of course, the latest in Hildebrand. See you then.